Hey guys, it seems that Games Workshop's been lying to us. This is the Combat Patrol for Death Guard, and don't worry, we're going to be painting up the Plague Marines in this video. But this comes with 39 models, and as you can see on the back, that is 30 Poxwalkers, 7 Plague Marines, as well as 2 characters. And as a person that was always kind of interested in Death Guard, but never really started a full army of them, this has always kind of put me off, because in 10th edition, it costs you the same amount of points to take 10 Death Guard as it does 7 Death Guard. So with that in mind, it's always been a slight put off because you'd need to go out and buy another 3 Death Guard in order to have a unit of 10. So when building out this kit, it was quite actually a nice joy to find out that on the Poxwalker kits, you do get an extra Plague Marine, which brings you up to a total of 10 Plague Marines in the kit. And there is absolutely no mention of that on the box itself, so I'm kind of confused on that. I thought they would have mentioned it because you are getting some extra models. So with that in mind, that's a nice little extra, and what we're going to do now is look at tackling the Plague Marines in a really nice traditional Death Guard style, but making it quick and efficient so we can get them on the tabletop as quick as possible. All of our Plague Marines were built as per the instructions, and then we proceeded to give them a black to white zenithal prime. From here we can start to tackle the brush painting, and this was kicked off by attacking the armor. We are going to want to take a dark saturated green and then use this to apply a base coat over all of the armor sections, as well as any of the fleshy Nurgle details on the armor. We will need to do a couple of coats of this thinned down a little bit in order to get a nice smooth cover of this paint over all of the areas. From there we can start to build up a little bit of texture and aging, and we're going to do this by highlighting up the armor through sponging. We want to grab a slightly lighter brown green tone and mix this into our base coat, and then use this lighter, dirtier green tone and a sponge to apply a highlight across the model. We want to remove most of the excess off of the sponge and then start to dab this against the model's armor to give us a subtle, worn, textured highlight. Not only is this a fairly quick process, but it also gives us a very subtle change across the model. It gives us a really nice mottling texture effect of highlight. But what we're going to be doing next is actually pushing that a little bit further. Again, we're going to be using a dabbing motion with a sponge to achieve a nice amount of texture, but we're going to be pushing the brightness up a little bit more. However, this time we are going to want to use the brown green from our last mix and use this pure color with our sponge. Again, working around the model, dabbing this sponge against all of the armor pieces. In this second round, we do want to focus a little bit more on the actual light rebounce positions, so we can focus more on the lines of light following the impact, so it looks relatively consistent across the model. From here, we are going to mix up the application method just a little bit, which is going to give us the benefit of another texture across the model. We're going to be achieving this by mixing our brown green with a slightly lighter, more yellowy, greeny ochre tone, and then dry brush this across all of the armor. We will mainly be aiming to hit all of the upward facing areas, but we do want to make sure that when we apply this, we catch all of the edges with the dry brush. By applying these colors and mixes in varying different ways, we get a really nice texture build up across the model. And it's not an unwanted texture, it's a deliberate texture that we've applied through painting methods. This fits really well with the Nurgle decayed theme of worn texture and things like that, which I really like. Equally, you will notice that we now go from a green in the base coat and then up to a more yellowish highlight when we were doing the dry brushing. And this relatively easily replicates the look that we get on the box art for Death Guard, where they are greener and it kind of goes to a more sun-like highlight. But for the next steps, we are going to need to do some edge highlighting, and we're going to be pushing those edges a little bit further than we already have. What we want to do now is take a little bit of time to hit the subscribe button. No, sorry, I mean, we want to take a little bit of time and some pure ochre, and then use this to push our highlights out a little bit. We can work around the model using this color to pick out any of the sharp edges of armor, as well as catch any of the edges of dents, holes, and any sort of texture on the armor itself. This will push the armor slightly too bright and yellow for what we actually want, but that is intentional. As the next step, what we're going to be doing is pushing back the tones slightly and also harmonizing our past work, and that will be achieved by applying a muddy green wash over all of the model's armor details. We want to make sure this covers all of the armor sections, but we need to take the time to mop up any pooling before leaving them to dry. This wash helps to tone down all of the work that we've done so far, so we knock a bit of the brightness out of our yellow, but we are still keeping all of the work that we have built in and just slightly darkening it down. So we still get the similar to box art effect of green working up to a slightly yellower tone, but it's not as bright yellow due to the wash. From this point, that is the armor mostly done, and we don't really have to worry about it apart from some trim later on. So what we're going to do now is go around and pick out all of the rest of the details, and we're going to want to base coat essentially everything that isn't armor or nurgly skin, flesh or maggots in a nice brown. The quickest and easiest way I've found to achieve this is to apply a quick coat of a brown contrast. This is saturated enough to tint the raised surfaces into a nice dark brown, while also making sure the deeper recesses are almost black. Taking time to work around all of the elements on the model, while avoiding to get any of this contrast on areas that we've already painted, such as the armor, we want to start to highlight, and we're going to be doing this by mixing in a pale brown into our initial contrast. And then this will be used to highlight all of the areas that are non-metal. This includes details like the teeth, the spikes, as well as the fabrics. We can then finish off any of these areas by taking our light brown from the mix, using it pure, diluting it slightly, and applying this as a bright edge highlight on all of those brown areas. Naturally, when we do these highlights, you can do them in any particular manner you like. Normally when I do highlights on fabrics, robes, capes and things like that, I go around and do some more flowing, blended sorts of highlights. However, on this, given the textures that we've built into the armor, I decided to do the same for a lot of the fabrics, going around and doing the highlights in a more scratchy, stipply sort of manner, so that we get some texture on the fabrics as well as the armor that we've already built in. From there, we are going to want to actually keep out our pale brown, because we're going to be using this on top of our nurgly fleshy skin bits, which have been covered in the green from our armor up until this point. When we were going around and painting the armor, we will have caught the various faces and skin sections sculpted onto the armor. Now what we're going to do is take a pale brown and use this to broadly highlight these areas, catching most of the surfaces, leaving the green in the recesses. This will give us a range of flesh areas going from green in the recesses up to a flesh-like pale brown on the raised areas, which will bring these various elements across the model together and set us up perfectly for future steps. Before we jump in and do those next steps, however, we have a few things we need to do first, and we're going to be starting off by grabbing a bright red paint and using this to paint a couple of details on the model. Now we do need to be careful when we use this because it's essentially a colour on the opposite side of the colour wheel. It's going to show up quite stark and quite bright against the colours we've used on the model so far. So we don't really want to overdo it, but there are some elements like blood as well as plasma, coils and some other sorts of damage on the models where we will want to put down some red. Using this red, we are going to just be picking out a few choice parts. Mainly here we're focusing on the various blood drops, any battle damage or wounds in the armour, as well as catching the eye lenses and plasma coils. Now, before we finish off the reds and the skins, we've got to finally tackle those metals. And what we're going to want to do here is grab a medium to bright gold and use this to heavily overbrush all of the metal areas. This will go over the brown base coat nicely, leaving a matte brown in all of the recesses, which then moves to a brighter shiny gold. This sets the stage perfectly for the final step of a purple wash. And this purple wash is going to be applied over essentially all of the elements that we've painted so far and not washed. So we're going to be catching all of the nurgle skin sections that are green up to a brown. We're going to be catching all of the red elements we've painted, as well as catching all of the metallics that we've just finished. Once this wash is dry, we get a nice effect on all of the areas that we've applied it to. So the skin is green at the base and then goes up to our brown. That turns into a really nice desaturated pallid skin tone with the top surfaces catching that tint of purple. Then we've got the reds, which are now not as poppy and have a nice recessed shade in purple. And then finally, we've also got all of the metals, and the purple gives a nice looking patina to the metal areas on the model without a lot of work. Naturally, we could go round and start to edge highlight and re-highlight up all of these areas that we've applied washes to. And if you want to do that, that is entirely up to you and would push the models that little bit further if you're willing to invest the time. Personally, the main bit that I would like to go around and touch up on these guys, and probably will do after this video, is all of the boils on the models. And we can achieve that really quickly. And if you're interested in how we could achieve that so quickly, why not check out this video, which is where we painted up the 30 poxwalkers from this combat patrol. And we did it incredibly quickly, and we spent a little bit more attention on their boils than we did in this video. Otherwise, do remember to subscribe so that we can see you next time.